Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, the end of the second line from the top. Dr. Gemara Amar Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina said, "Shachas Gedei La'isa b'nei Hakanim Hagadolim." He said, by the Kahanim Hagadolim, they were very lavish and gaivadik. How is that? We mentioned earlier that Abba Shaul said that the Kahanim Gedolim would use their own money to build the kevish, to build the ramp, to transport out the Parah Aduma. So they used their own money, and he said they would spend 60 kikorei zav to build this ramp. And even though the previous ramp still was in existence, but if there was a new kohen gadol, he wouldn't use the existing ramp because the previous ramp was on the name of the previous kohen gadol. He would want a davka for himself to be mentioned on his own name. And what do we do? Even though they had this expensive ramp that was already built, he would demolish the previous one and build a new one to be built on his name. He asked the kasha, he said, how could that be? We learn Shimon HaTzadik, Paras also. Shimon HaTzadik was a kohen gadol, and he made 2 paradumas in his lifetime. And he didn't take the para, the second one, with the same ramp that he had the first one. Now, this was Shimon HaTzadik. He wouldn't have done anything gaivadik. And it was also, the previous ramp was on his name. They were both in his name. So that's not the reason why they demolished the ramp. So Islach Lameim Shimon HaTzadik Shachas Hayek, can you say that Shimon HaTzadik was a Hazard? That's why he made a new ramp? Maikadain, what is the pshat though? Why did he do it? Al Shemala Hi B'Parah. It was number one, for the model paraduma. Now we know that for the paraduma, since we were makeled by the paraduma, and we said that it's kosher but full yaim, so we made this kula, and therefore we made many milas. We made many chumras to show, to uphold the mile of the strictness of this, so that people should not be lax in the paraduma. So that's number one, to show the mile that we're building a special kevesh for the paraduma, even though the previous one is still in existence. And also, another reason is to show covet for the mitzvah of the paraduma. Tani, we learn in the Brisa, Zizan Aksalam Hayesmi Kanamekan. The ramps, we're speaking of the ramps, it had extending from it, it had beams and walls extending from it. Why is that? So the Kahanim that were taking up the Paradum should not lean over and look to the bottom, because if they did, maybe there would be a kever or mace over there, and they'd be mal over the mass and become tomei, so they'd block their view over there, and they couldn't see the ground below, so they wouldn't lean over. So the Mishnah continued about what we do with the different items, and Rav Shmuel said that they used to use from the moiser of the Shoresh Kolim, the cactus used to buy flour and oil and wine, and they used to be able to profit from it. But Rabbi Kiva said, no, that Amos Takim Mishal Hektish, we don't profit, we don't do business ventures with Hektish's money. However, the Gemara qualifies it. So Rabbi Kiva said, I have such a life, but he could engage in a business endeavor as long as there's a condition that if there's any profit, the profit goes to Hektish. If there's a loss, then he bears the loss. So then it's mutter. If they make such a condition, you have such a lot of schar lahektish, then it's mutter. Kada bar zamina, like the case of bar zamina, is because gabe midal deasme, that it was deposited with him the money that was collected for Yisayim. Also, Vishala Rabbi Mana, he asked Rabbi Mana, can he use the money for a business venture? Could it be invested? So Omar Lee said to him, in boys, if you want to make a condition, do you have to deduct that if there's a loss, that you bear exclusively the loss. v'agra d'tarvechan, but there's a profit you share with it, sorry, then it's mutter. But there can be no loss. There can be no loss for the assignment. So if you want to then have that kind of condition, now here it says that the agra is the tarvechan. Previously we said that if there's by hektish, we said that if there's a profit, it goes to hektish. It doesn't say to both of you. It says it goes to hektish, and if there's a loss that is borne by the person who's investing in, then it's mutter. So there it says that the profit would accrue seems to be strictly to hektish. Over here it says that you share in it. So presumably over here that since he was a managing partner, so to speak, that he would be entitled, since it's on the behalf of the assignment, he was a managing partner, he'd be entitled to a share of the profits, but the assignment cannot suffer any loss. Rav Chia bar Ada is because Gabe middle Yasmin, and Maisa happened to him, and he had with him, was deposited with him the money of the assignment, and that's what he did. So he did it that the assignment were protected and they would have no loss. So the Mishnah explains what is from the excess of other items. Meiser Peiros, the excess of Peira is. So what does it mean? The excess of Peira is when it says that these are Peiros. So Meiser Peiros, Masnisa Rabbi Shmoli. This is going with the shlit of Rav Shmuel, the Rav Chia bar Yosef, Pasha Masnisa, because that's the way Rav Chia bar Yosef explained the Mishnah, that it's Meiser Peiros Schar LaHektish. What it was referring to is, like we said previously, that when Hektish has the sale of wine, oil, and flour, and if there's a profit, and according to Rav Shmuel, they are allowed to profit, they are allowed to go into business venture with a profit. So the profit that came out of that extra, that's what's referring to, that's the extra of the payers that's dealing. Meiser Nesachim, what does it refer to when it says Meiser Nesachim? Is a saw, Revius, it's a fourth saw. If when Hektish buys the Nesachim, what they need for the Nesachim, so for instance, they buy flour for the Nesachim. Hektish is protected that if there's a price fluctuation, they're always protected. If the price goes up, then they purchase it at the original lower price. If the price goes down, they take advantage of the lower price. So if they paid a seller and the stipulation was that you get 3 saw, now if the price goes down and the time of delivery is the seller buys 4 saws, they get this extra saw. So under those circumstances, Hektish had excesses. They had extra flour or extra nesachim that they got because of the price fluctuation. That's what it's referring to, that Meiser Nesachim is the saw Revius. Rabbi Yochanan Pasuk Masnisim, but Rabbi Yochanan explained the Mishnah differently. He said, no, it's not going dafka according to Rabbi Shmuel. He says, Meiser Peiros, it's not the profit from business ventures, it's saw Revius. That's referring to saw Revius. Meiser Nesachim leBeirutzim. The Meiser Nesachim means the Beirutzim when they measured and they supplied the flour for the mincha and menachos, when they supplied it, they did it and up to the top and even over. So it overflowing the edge, the rim of the keli. It was heaped up on top over the brim, and so therefore there was that which was on top, which was not needed for the nesachim. So this was extra, this excess, and that's the extra measure that they had. That's what it's referring to. So, frag the Gemara of Leslie, the Rav Chia bar Yosef leBeirutzim, the Rav Chia bar Yosef doesn't he hold that Hektish is allowed to profit from the Beirutzim? Why doesn't he mention Beirutzim? They're certainly allowed to profit from the Beirutzim. Amar Rabbi Chizkiya, Mad Nafal Saw Revius Nafal Beirutzim. He says that yes, they do, but it's included. It's mentioned the Saw Revius. It's the Beirutzim goes for the same. It goes for the same. And for the same purpose. It's included in that category. I'll die to the Rav Chia bar Yosef Nich. So now the Gemara says, when Rav Chia bar Yosef says that the Peiros, you're saying that the Peiros it's referring to Rabbi Shmuel. So it's nicha. We understand it. We understand the explanation because in mistaken b'shal hektish afloy b'shal aniyim lefichach zeh v'zeh lo yamayim b'peres. So that's why we understand why the Mishnah says that both Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Kiva, that they did not agree with the Paris, because if you say that the Paris is the way Rabbi Bar Yosef says, that the Paris is that the money, the excess, the profits that Hektish got from their business transactions, it's only Rabbi Shmuel says that they were allowed to do it. Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Chanina say that you don't. So therefore, we say, we understand that. Because if the Paris is referring to what they profited from the transactions, that's why they weren't made. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's difficult. Because he says that the Paris it's not referring to the business transactions. He's saying that the Paris it's referring to is the Soravias. Well, aren't everybody Maida, isn't Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Chanina, aren't they also Maida to the Soravias? Now we learned in the Mishnah on the Misholosh, if the price was set that there would be a delivery, and the price was 4 saw of flour, for instance, 4 saw for a seller. And then if the price rose, and now the price rose so that it was 3 for a seller, nevertheless, he's stopping Me'arba. He has to provide 4 saw. So it seems to be that everybody agrees that these Hektish is protected of the price fluctuation. So everybody would agree that Hektish gets the extra saw. Utaninan says Paris. And however, it says that both Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Chanina were not Maida Paris. Well, if this is what Paris means, why wouldn't they be Maida? The Gemara says that no. Yes, they were Maida that there are Paris. Meaning, if Paris means Soravias, yes, they also are Maida that there is a profit for Hektish for the Soravias. But they say that that's not what this went for. That's not what it didn't go for this purpose. It didn't go for the purpose of Ketzah Mizbeach. It went for Aval Moedim Hoya B'Kli Sharis. It says they didn't go for this purpose. It's not that they said not that they weren't Maida that there is a Soravias and it's mutter the Soravias, but they weren't Maida that it went L'Ketzah Mizbeach. They said that this excess and this profit that came from the Soravias, it went to purchase Kli Sharis. And that's what it went for. It didn't go for the purpose of the Ketzah Mizbeach. Ad Kedain Berutzei Tzibor. So we said that Rabbi Bar Yosef and Rabbi Yochanan agreed that the excess of the Nesachim, that the Meiser Nesachim, it includes the Berutzei Midas, the overflowing of the measurements. So Ad Kedain Berutzei Tzibor. So we know that would be if there is an excess for Karbanas Tzibor. So for instance, if you have the Nesachim for Musafim, etc., Karbanas Tzibor, and you have this extra excess that reached above, then I would understand that this goes for this purpose. But Afil Berutzei Yachid, could it be also that for a Korban Yachid, where a Yachid, an individual, brings his own Nesachim for his Korban, and you have the excess, the overflowing of the midas, that also it would be used for Kli Sharis, Nimsa Kli Sharis by Mishal Yachid. The Kli Sharis is for Avodas Tzibor, and if you have the Berutzei midas from a Korban Yachid from the Nesachim, does it not mean that this is coming from the Yachid and not the Tzibor? The Gemara says no. And it's like we learned in the Brayse Isha Shalsa Kasainis Lebanah, like we learned previously, that if a woman makes a Kasainis for her son, the Kohen Gadol, so she wants to donate and make it from her own funds, Kshera, Tim Serrano, the Tzibor, it's Kshera, but she has to give it wholehearted to the Tzibor. But we say it's mutter because we assume that she will give it wholeheartedly. So therefore, here also, even though it's a Korban Tzibor, but the Berutzei, the excess, will be given to the Tzibor, and the Yachid will give it wholeheartedly. So therefore, it can be used for the Kli Sharis for the Tzibor because it belongs to the Tzibor. Ad Kadain Brutze Lach, Afilo Berutze Yavish. So we say it as far as liquid measurements. So if we're talking about a liquid measurement of oil, etc., then we would say yes, the extra amount that is slightly above the rim, then that would be belong to hektish, and that would be used for this purpose. But would you say it also for beirutza yovish, for the dry measurements, for flour, for instance? Now, what's the chilik between the liquid and the dry, and the flour, the dry measures? Because the liquid, what you pour in, what comes to the top is through displacement. So when you pour in the liquid into the kli, the first liquid that you pour in was in the kli, was niskadish with the kli. And then as you pour in extra, the amount that you pour in displaces the liquid on the bottom, and that comes to the top as it rises up, and the amount that rises above the rim was already in the kli, so was niskadish in the kli. So there we understand that that's a moiser and hektish, and it goes to kli short. But the dry measurements never had that kedusha. It's just piled on top. It was never within the kli. It never had the kedusha from the kli. So the Gemara says, if the Nesachim are Kiddush B'Kli, meaning it needs Kiddush B'Kli, and then if Nimsa Zevach Posel, in that case, if the carbon was Posel, if there's another carbon, you can couple it and pair it with a different carbon. But in love, but if not, if they're not, then then if there's no other carbon, then you leave it overnight, it becomes possible yivsibelina, and it becomes possible with lina, and then it's burnt. So, but you see over here that there is a chilik between dry and liquid, because you see that you need kiddush with inside the kli sharas. So the kli sharas has to be mekadosh. So like the Mishnah, what did they do with the leftover of Keteris? So now they have the Keteris, and it was now the year has passed, the new year is coming, they want to use Keteris that's purchased from the New Year's funds. Now you have the leftover Keteris from last year. So what did you do with it? They would set aside the amount that's needed to pay for the umnim, the workers, the artisans in the Beis HaMikdash. They would set aside equal to the wages. And the machal nenoisa al moisa umnim. And they would machalal the keteres on the money that was to be paid to the umnim. Which we'll see in the Gemara shortly how this works. The noisa naibsal umnim bischarn, and then they pay the keteres to the umnim. So they have the Ketaris, which is Mechula, which is Chulin, which is paid to the Umnin, and then they take from the new Shekalim, from this year's Shekalim, the new Shekalim, they take it and they buy that Ketaris. So this Ketaris now becomes Ketaris, this year's Ketaris. It's bought from this year's Shekalim, it's this year's Ketaris, and then they can be Makter, they can use it for the Ketaris. We'll see shortly in the Gemara more precisely how this works. It's like the Mishnah, if the new Chatzi Shek came in the proper time before Nisan, then they purchase this Keteris, the Keteris that they were Machalal, which is now Chulin, from this new money. But in love, if they have no choice and there's no new money, Mina Yashana, they use it from the leftover from the old money. Zok the Gemara, so how does this procedure work where they're machalal the ketairis and they pay it to the workers for their wages and then they buy it back? Right, the Gemara v'loy nimsa hektish mischalal hektish. Aren't you being machal hektish with hektish? How can you be machal the ketairis? You want to transfer it and make it chulin. So you're transferring it on the money that was to be paid to the workers. Now, as Rabbeinu Tam says, you can't be machal on the work, because you can't be machal just simply on the money that's owed, because that's something that is in by mamish. So therefore, you can't be machaled simply on what's owed to them. So that is intangible. So you have to be machaled on something. So presumably they're machaled on the money that was set aside to pay the workers. The money that's set aside to pay the workers is from hektish berakabayas. So how can you be machaled the ketairis on money which is hektish, which has kedusha of hektish berakabayas? So leinim hektish halal hektish. So Moshe says no. This is how you do it. Ketzer u'oisa. Amar Rav Shimon ben Bishnai, he says maybe mos machalal labinyan. You take money that was from berakabayas, and you machalal it on the binyan. They had the stones that they built, for instance, on the walls, etc., from chulin. They were boine bechol. So that was chulin. Then they transferred from the money of hektish berakabayas, they were machalal it on the stones, and now the money is chulin. So that money is chulin. So that's the first step. And then umevi keteres machalal lein. And then, now since they have now this money which is chulin, they're machalal the keteres on this money. So now the money becomes kodesh. Then v'noisen oisel numim b'scharin. Then they pay the keteres, which is now chulin, they pay it to the umnin for their wages. So the wages umnin are paid with keteres, which is chulin. Now they take the new shkolim and they buy the keteres from the umnim, so they're machalel the money, the new shkolim. They're machalel on the keteres. The workers have the shkolim, which are now chulin. The new shkolim, which are now chulin. The keteres is kodesh, and it's kodesh with this year's shkolim. So then they can be makter it on the mizbeach because it's from the new shkolim.